What is up, guys? Thank you so much for being here. So today I want to talk about this lens, which is the Sigma 56 f1.4 for all the Sony APS-C cameras. And I want to give you guys as much information as I can based off all the research that I've done on it, and then obviously my experience using it. That way, if you're thinking about getting it, hopefully I can help you make that decision. And so we're gonna go over all the specs, the build quality, the pros and cons, and then kind of like how I use the lens or what I use it for. So let's get started with the specs. The aperture goes from f1.4 to f16. It has a 55mm filter thread, weighs 9.88 ounces or 280 grams, has a minimum focus distance of 1.6 feet or half a meter. Now as for the build of the lens, I would say that it's really nice because for one, it's super small and compact, which I like. It obviously comes with a lens hood, but you can see how small this thing is. And even though it's super small, it feels like it's got a good weight to it. It's not like too light or cheap feeling. And the focus ring, which is the only thing on here because it doesn't have like any extra buttons or anything. It just has a nice, very smooth focus ring, which I think works really good. And it has a good grip to it, like a rubberized texture. So it definitely feels well built, which is cool because there's some lenses that perform very well and they're good lenses, but they look and they feel kind of cheap and lightweight, which again, it's not really like a terrible thing if they perform well, but it's nice when you have a lens that performs well and just looks and feels like high quality, like you have a good piece of equipment. Also on their website, they mentioned that this is weather sealed. Now I wouldn't trust it if it was just like pouring down rain, but it should be fine with like a little bit of sprinkles or dust. If you take off the back cap, it does have like a rubber weather sealing gasket around here. Let's move on to all the pros of this lens. And the number one pro by far, which is like the main reason that you're gonna buy this lens, or at least most people, is the fact that the aperture does open up to f1.4. I mean, for one, there's just not that many like APS-C lenses that open up to f1.4, especially at this focal length. And what that does is that allows you to get that really nice like bokeh, which is the blurry background that helps isolate your subject. And so whether you're taking like portraits of somebody and you want them to have that really nice blurry background that just looks really pretty in portraits, or if you're taking some cool cinematic video and you want to isolate your subject and just make it more cinematic, either way, when you have an aperture that goes to a smaller number, like the smaller the number, so this is f1.4, like the nicer that's gonna look. So the bigger the bokeh balls of light are gonna be, the more blurry the background's gonna get because it creates a shallower depth of field, and so it just looks even better than like an f1.8 or 2.5 or 2.8 or anything like that. So f1.4 is hard to come by on the Sony APS-C cameras, but the f1.4 aperture also lets in more light because the smaller that f number is, then the more light it's letting in. And so now you're not only getting all those benefits, but you're also getting like something that performs better in low light. So then if you're doing photography, you don't have to lower your shutter speed as much, and so you have a better chance of getting sharper photos in lower lit situations or at night. And then for video, it's just gonna perform better in video because it's letting more light into the sensor. And so that allows you to keep the proper shutter speed when you're taking video, and it's still gonna look really crisp and good when you're taking any kind of low light video. Now another pro that's gotta be right up there with everything that we just talked about is the sharpness. And normally I wouldn't put sharpness as important as like the f1.4 aperture because overall I'd rather have the f1.4 aperture than something that's super sharp. But in this case, we got real lucky because you have that f1.4 aperture and you have extreme sharpness. Like this has gotta be the sharpest lens on the Sony APS-C camera, at least from all the lenses that I've used and from everything that I've seen online. There is not like a sharper lens for the Sony APS-C cameras than the Sigma 56. I've seen videos where they compare this lens to other full frame 85mm lenses that cost 3 times the price of this, and they're still not as sharp as this guy. So yeah, the sharpness is just absolutely ridiculous. So those are the main pros, is the f1.4 aperture and everything that allows you to do, and the sharpness. But of course, there's still other pros like the build quality that we kind of talked about. It just feels good. The focus ring is super smooth. The weather sealing that I already mentioned, but then something that I haven't mentioned yet is the autofocus, because the autofocus on this guy is actually really, really good. And there's some non-native lenses, which if you don't know what that means, it just means that, like, for example, on my Sony camera, a native lens would be a Sony lens. This is a Sigma lens, but it's made for my Sony camera, so it's just called a non-native lens. But from all the non-native lenses, which typically they're not going to have as good of autofocus as the Sony lenses on a Sony camera. But honestly, the autofocus on this is really, really good. And I couldn't really tell the difference between this and some of my Sony lenses. Now, I do have some Sony lenses that are just like a tad faster and more accurate, but it's very, very close. And like I said, I have some that are just as good as this. So the autofocus is definitely a pro, even if it's not as good as some of the Sony lenses, but it's definitely as good as some of the Sony lenses that I own. So it's definitely a pro. And the last pro that I wanted to mention is the price, just because I feel like it's really good for what you're getting. Like I mentioned, there's some full frame lenses that are meant for portraits like this one that don't do as well and they're not as sharp as this guy. And so I just think that the price, which is $429, at least on most websites, but I just feel like that's a really good deal, even though it's not super cheap, but it's not super expensive either. I just feel like it's a good price for how well this lens performs when it comes to sharpness and everything that we talked about, all the capabilities of it. So with that being said, I did check the price today, and I know I said it's normally $429.99, but I saw it on Amazon for $384.99, which is just ridiculous because, I mean, you may be able to find it used somewhere, but I mean, to be honest, this is a hard lens to find used just because so many people really like it. And so you're probably gonna have to buy it new unless you find one that's a little bit more beat up. But anyways, yeah, so $384.99 is a great price. I just saw that today when I was filming this video. So hopefully it's still like that if you go check it. But I'll go ahead and put a link in the description down below to the one that I saw on Amazon. That way, if you're interested, you can go ahead and pick that up and you get that good deal. And so not only does it help you out, but it helps me out as well because I get a small percentage from Amazon. And even though it's not that much, it does make a big difference to supporting my channel and helping it grow. So I do appreciate that. Now, as for the cons, I couldn't really think of much. This probably has less cons than almost any lens that I've used. But the only con I would really say is the fact that it doesn't have any stabilization. If this thing had stabilization, it would just be like absolutely perfect. It pretty much is perfect for what it does. The reason you would want stabilization, if you don't know, if you're taking video, it makes a big difference to like get the little hand jitters or camera shake that you might get if you don't have any stabilization. But if you're mostly buying this lens for photos, which is probably what most people are gonna do, then you probably don't even care about that. Now, having stabilization can help for photography as well, but it's just a bigger deal in video. That's probably the only real con because this lens is just really good, specifically for like what it does. And that kind of leads me into the last part of this video, which is talking about like what I use this lens for and what I think most people would be buying the lens for, because this is specifically for taking portraits. Now, obviously you can use it for other things. You can use it for getting like different types of shots if you're making a video and you just want like a different perspective or a different view, then this would be good for that as well. Most of the reason why people would buy this lens is to take portraits or just really nice photos, because the fact that this lens is a 56mm on an APS-C camera, that would be equivalent to the type of look that you would get from a 85mm on a full frame, or to be more specific, this would be an 84mm on a full frame, but it's basically giving you that same look as the 85mm, which is the focal length that a lot of people choose for taking professional portraits. It's pretty much the #1 choice. I mean, you can take portraits with anything, but it tends to be the most common by professionals. They use 85mm lenses because it just does a really good job of not distorting the face and giving nice blurry background, enough compression. And so it just does a lot of nice things for portraits. And that's what I mostly plan on using this lens for moving forward, is for portraits. But obviously up to this point I've used it for a little bit of everything because I was testing it out and I wanted to see how it performed on video and different kinds of photos, low light, everything. But moving forward, this is just gonna be like my portrait lens. But this can be used for any kind of photography. I mean, obviously it's not a wide lens, so if you wanted to get more in your frame, you would have to back up. But when it comes to just any kind of photography, wanting to get nice sharp photos, I would definitely highly recommend this lens. Well guys, I hope that this video was helpful and I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, definitely go ahead and hit the like button. It's like a super simple thing that you can do that really helps out my channel, so I would appreciate that. And subscribe if you're not already, because I'm going to be doing a lot more lens reviews in the future. Plus I've already got a good amount of them on my channel. And I also do like camera gear reviews and just other videos that have to do with like photography and making videos and stuff like that. So other than that, I just want to thank you guys again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.